I just want to welcome everyone to our webinar on Zipcar and the sharing economy, what can government learn? Today's event is hosted by the Harvard Ash Center's Government Innovators Network. Antonio Oftelie, Fellow at the Technology and Entrepreneurship Center at Harvard University, will be starting us off today.
Good evening to those from Europe joining us and across the ocean, and good afternoon to those of us on the East Coast, and good morning to the West Coast and the others. Thank you for being here. Once again, my name is Antonio Oftelie. I'm a fellow at the Technology and Entrepreneurship Center here at Harvard. I think we have a really good webinar for you here today. I'd like to start off with some thanks to Dan Curtin, who's the Vice President of Operations and Service Quality for Zipcar, who will present today, as well as Greg Wass, the Chief Information Officer of Cook County, Illinois. Also like to say thanks to the Harvard Kennedy School and the Ash Center for Democratic Governance and Innovation for hosting today. And most importantly, thanks to all of you in the audience who've taken time from your busy schedules to discuss these issues and learn from each other today. So our goal here today is to better understand what we're calling this new sharing economy and how we as leaders can both respond to it and leverage it for improving government. To do this, I'll give a brief introduction on the key concepts. Then I'll have Dan Curtin from Zipcar talk about the Zipcar business model. Then Greg Wass from Cook County will tell you how the greater Chicago area is moving forward in this sharing economy. You can submit questions at any time, but we'll probably hold most of them until after the panelists have finished, and then we'll engage in as much Q&A as you all would like. So let's talk a bit at the macro level here about the sharing economy in general. So the old, what we call the non-sharing economy, has been around for quite a long time. From early times, leaders have grappled with how to best structure societies and the organizations that we have in order to serve citizens and constituents well. To do this, leaders throughout time have developed ranges or areas of authority for delivery of services, for rules, for judicial oversight, regulations, law enforcement, and other types of activities that government does. They also developed the territories over which that authority is exercised, what we now generally call jurisdictions. Leaders then created the organizations and institutions that enact the rules and deliver the services, what we now call bureaucracies, and what we oftentimes call silos, and when we're really having fun, sometimes we call cylinders of excellence. Since then, the role of jurisdictional governance, as well as the form of the bureaucracies and the organizations, have largely remained the same, except for small changes resulting from advances during the Industrial Revolution and the first phase of the Information Revolution. Yet even with these advances, jurisdictions continue to develop so that the principal seats of government, where they're located and where they serve, are kind of a day's horse ride apart, as we used to say in the United States in the 1800s. So even the advent of the telegraph and the telephone and different communication types like that couldn't really change that formula. So despite the slow evolution of jurisdictions and bureaucracies, the central thread throughout time has been the need for leaders like you guys on the line today to provide these structures and institutions in a way that citizens look at as efficient, effective, and equitable. They're fair throughout society. That calculation, along with the transparency of what we're doing, legitimizes a government and its institutions. So that brings us to this next phase of the information revolution, what we're calling the sharing economy. So what is this new sharing economy? Well, first off, it's being led by the consumer marketplace, where individuals are choosing to forego the old ways of purchasing an asset or product solely for themselves, and instead choosing to purchase bits and pieces of an asset or a service whenever and wherever it suits them most. Consumers are doing this in simple ways, such as using applications that match people who need a parking spot with someone who wants to, say, rent out their garage or driveway space when it's not in use. They're also doing let people share in the risk and reward of large-scale financial and funding transactions. So underpinning this sharing economy are new ways people and companies can organize themselves virtually through social networks and platforms that enables real-time and 24/7 access to information. Also through new ways people and organizations can send out, receive, and process information and data through mobile apps and network-enabled platforms that provide a connecting point. So you may ask, what's really new about all this? Are we not doing this before? Well, what's different now is that the intersection of technologies such as GPS, Web 2.0 technologies, data mining, cloud computing, etc., are all wrapped or can be wrapped in shareable, what we call platforms, or technologies or systems that make cooperation and coordination possible in configurations where the transaction costs previously would have been prohibitive. So before, the type of coordination we could have wasn't there because it was too costly. Now with these new technologies, it's much more affordable. So these new capabilities enable jurisdictions, governments, and bureaucracies to coordinate and collaborate both what we call vertically through the value chain of government and horizontally across traditional jurisdictional or organizational boundaries. So this brings new capacity in the design, development, and delivery of goods and services. In essence, this new sharing economy creates a deeper and wider range of sharing for government and education and organizations, what we call the plus factor when we're working at shared services here in government. So deeper meaning that new capabilities to coordinate and share strategic or customer-facing services as well as non-strategic back office services we can do. Wider so that we can create, procure, produce, and deliver services across organizational and jurisdictional lines. And also with this, an interesting thing that's happened really over the past probably 4 to 5 years is what we call harmonization. It's where this technology really creates or enables an organization to track more types of assets, from things like in social services where we have open shelter beds in a community, to accounting systems, to broadband networks, to fleet vehicles. Every asset or type of input we have in organizations can be tracked. It also can track it in real time, meaning that we can have 24/7 sharing without people having to make phone calls and plead and cajole each other to share something. Lastly, this technology allows synchronizing the usage of an asset with people who want to use it more efficiently and dynamically. So it makes sharing more customer-centric, which makes people all around happier. So as a quick glance at some examples of this in the sharing economy, we have a slide here with just four quick ones, and Greg Wass will go more deeply into this as well as Dan Curtin from Zipcar. But example one is Ontario Shared Services in the lower left-hand quadrant there of this plus factor, where they deliver strategic advice and services and financial services, human services, payroll, enterprise services, many back office functions. They've saved $225 million through and it enabled more flexibility in their organization over just a 4-year period of time since they've launched this. When we look next at the Texas Department of Licensing and Regulation, they've been able to become a revenue-generating agency and a self-sufficient enterprise by essentially bundling and applying the provisions of 29 different programs across the state of Texas and the rules needed to administer 143 different license types for more than 650,000 licensees. So people that want to do anything from going hunting to businesses that want a permit for something will go to one organization that's sharing this platform across Texas in order to get licensing information done. Another interesting example is the Minnesota Local Government Information System, which has about 45 member counties and localities. That area has about 2.1 million residents, and LOGIS, as they call it, supplies applications and network services, IP telephony, etc., across these jurisdictions. They've saved their $73 million in Minnesota since its inception. Lastly, the California Department of Child and Sport Services and 58 different county-level human services organizations share a platform where they can manage all eligibility for food stamps, Medicaid, temporary needy families, and other health and human services programs. Also, constituents can apply for benefits via self-service portal. This collaboration has generated tangible success, delivering more than $200 million in benefits per month to Californians in need, while generating ongoing savings of about $100 million annually. So you see there's lots of really good examples here happening in the public sector and in the social sector. So broadly, why should we care, and why are we on the call here again today? What we can do here with the sharing economy is we can increase effectiveness of public services, we can increase the capacity of organizations to deliver services, we can increase transparency and accountability, and overall produce better government. For those that do want to dig in more to this after the webinar, we have coming up in June, the 2012 Public Sector and Education Shared Services Summit, June 20th through 22nd, hosted here by the Technology and Entrepreneurship Center at Harvard. We'll be looking at the sharing economy, shared services in government and education. We'll have Harvard faculty, industry experts, and about 120 or so practitioners from around the world here on the Harvard campus. So take a look at that if you are interested there. So before we hand it over to Dan at Zipcar, I'll give a little bit of an intro as to who these Zipcar people are anyways. There are a few cities around the nation, the United States, that have Zipcar. Dan will probably go into what those cities are. I know here in Boston area we have it. I use it quite frequently. In D.C., where a lot of us are logged in from, it's there. But generally, what's happening with Zipcar is in the consumer marketplace, as we talked about, the sharing economy has spawned a new type of customer who prefers buying in pieces rather than wholes. And so Zipcar really is the world's largest sharing company in this respect, and they run the web-based platform that facilitates the sharing and benefits. There's three primary things that happen from when we look at societal value from the sharing economy and what Zipcar does. So from the individual perspective, consumers can get wheels when they want them, as they say. They can lower their average monthly cost while enjoying the benefits that come from having a car. Zipcar, in case, can leverage economies of scale to spread the cost and usage of vehicles across a larger user base, while also earning revenues that sustain their enterprise. And society in general can make more efficient use of vital resources with less congestion and less pollution, while fostering a more sustainable environment. It's what we call a win-win-win model, and it's definitely a movement that's growing. So before we go over to Dan, as you're listening to him, let's reflect on a few different questions here. As we listen to him, think about how Zipcar's customer-centric service culture can be applied in government and education. We haven't thought about that much in government as of yet, so we could be able to get some good lessons learned from that. We should think about what areas of operations, what resources can we share in the public, nonprofit, and education sectors, and also think about what's the appropriate scope of this sharing. Also think about what types of platforms should government create to enable sharing. What can we do as leaders within our organizations to open up our boundaries, to open up our data, to bring it out to citizens and private sector and constituents so that they can help us with this. And lastly, and probably most importantly, this represents what we call an adaptive challenge. There's a lot of change and new competencies needed. So how should we change our organizations, governance models, and cultures to prepare them for the sharing economy? With that, we'll turn it over to Dan Curtin at Zipcar. Dan, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Antonio. It's a pleasure to be with everybody today. I thought I'd start us off kind of quickly with the last slide. There we go. Start us off kind of quickly with where we are now, how we came about, and the benefits associated with car sharing, particularly with Zipcar car sharing. And then I thought it'd be a great idea to touch a little bit on some of the cultural aspects of the new sharing economy and some of the changes and the perceptions that we have from our side and through our 12 years of doing business here. So just a quick overview on how it works for those who aren't familiar. For those of you who are, we really appreciate your business. Basically, it's really simple how it works. You sign up as a member. Once you sign up and you're approved, you'll get an RFID card, a zip card, which will give you access to the entire fleet worldwide. It's as simple as going online and reserving a car or using a smartphone app to reserve one. You reserve the car you want at the location you want, when you want it. All those choices are the members' choices. When you will go to the car, your reservation information is already loaded into the brain. You scan in with your RFID card. That will unlock the doors and enable the ignition. And off you go to use the car as long as your reservation is. Our rates are also what we call wet rates, so they include the fuel in the car. There's a gas card above the visor that's kept there that's secure. So if the car needs gas during your trip, you're more than welcome to go in and gas it up, and that also helps the next member as well. The cars are also very secure as well. Once your reservation ends, you're the only one. You can't access the car anymore. So the car is all yours, but only during your reservation. The actual Zipsters, who we call our members, are 700,000 strong. We're currently accessing over 10,000 cars worldwide. The service, of course, works 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. It's completely self-service. We're in 18 major metropolitan areas around the world, 250 college campuses. And to give you an idea of the type of membership base that we can achieve, there are literally 10 million drivers that live within a 10-minute walk of a Zipcar. So as the sharing economy unfolds, we hope to be right on the leading edge of that. So Zipcar's genesis really kind of came about when what we can call the American dream of having a car kind of became a little bit of a nightmare. Somewhere along the line, the cost became extraordinarily prohibitive, particularly if you lived in the city. When you think about some of these costs, whether you drive the car or not, in a lot of jurisdictions, you still have to maintain insurance. You still may have to move your car because of car cleaning or street cleaning, rather. Your car is also subject to getting bumped into and banged about if it's in a congested area. But transportation isn't just a pain for people who own cars, it's also kind of a pain for people who don't own cars. So even if you're dependent upon transit or take cabs or bike or walk, the reality is sometimes you simply need a car. And that's kind of where we are, where we fill in. Until we came along, though, your choices were really simple. Either go rent a car, which is normally a trip to an office. There's the whole process of going through the car selection and the qualification and the sales process. You're held to returning that car and picking it up within the office area. So if it's 2 miles from your house, that's where you have to go. You're also subject to their hours, and a lot of local car rental companies are not open on Sunday and don't allow customers to return on Sunday. So a lot of times you didn't have all the control over the transaction, maybe that you needed or that you wanted. And that's kind of where we came about too. We're not car rental, we're car sharing. And our main competitor is really car ownership, particularly urban car ownership. But we've also kind of evolved a little bit, which I'll touch on a little bit later. With a lot of families that do absolutely need a car, we've become their second car too. So as we've evolved, we've seen that we've become different things to different people. One of probably the biggest advantages I think that we have here is the cost savings, which we'll touch on a little bit about the members. Again, a triple bottom line benefit with Zipcar. We're good for the consumers, we save them money. We're good for the communities because we can save them parking space and a lot of congestion on parked cars. We're also good for the planet and good for the environment. Our members drive less when they become car sharing members. If that car is sitting out in the driveway, you're more apt to use it. The best analogy is actually by our CEO, who said, if you buy a whole pizza, chances are you'll eat the whole pizza. But if you're buying pizza by the slice, you'll think about each one of those transactions before you buy them, and you'll probably tend to eat a little bit less. But again, looking at some of the financial benefits here, average household in America spends about 19% of its disposable income on transportation. For Zipcar, it's only 6%. Again, you only pay for when you use it. Traditionally, car sharing has taken anywhere between 15 to 20 cars off the road, and this includes people who have turned in their car or sold their car in favor of car sharing. And for other folks, too, that when they have this opportunity or have this option at their disposal, they won't go buy a car. That also pays a great deal of benefits in the millions of dollars worth of savings on parking spaces, parking garage, and parking lots that don't need to be built. One of our university partners, as a matter of fact, has given us an example of a parking garage that they would have had to have spent a few $1 million on to build, but instead really got behind the car sharing program, our program on campus many years ago, and as a result has been able to convince people not to bring a car to campus or not to buy a car when they get here. So then there goes, you don't need the parking garage to actually house it. So we think these benefits, again, speak to a lot of different people in a lot of different ways, and it's really rewarding to know that you work for a company that can bring this type of benefit and this type of transportation revolution to the market. Sharing economy and collaborative consumption. I think one of the things for me, and I've been with Zipcar for 8 years, is to really kind of see the whole cultural shift, and I think there's a number of reasons why this is taking place. particularly in some of the markets we're in. Demographics are changing. Millennials are emerging in the economy. They're graduating from school. They're now local business leaders and worldwide business leaders. So they're changing, and the thinking about consumption is changing a little bit. Generally speaking, everyone is or should be looking to save money, either personally, professionally, or culturally. Again, the age of excess, I think, has passed, and we should all be looking to spend the least amount to get the most amount of benefit. This obviously is particularly heavy hitting for government officials who face lowered budgets, but it's the same thing for consumers as well. The sharing economy, too, seems to be catching on everywhere. Although we may be credited for being the largest sharing organization, we've seen a lot of local sharing going on with peer-to-peer car sharing, where you're literally sharing your car with your next-door neighbor. We've also got another partner, Zimride, who promotes ride sharing through the same type of technology and same type of platform that we do, basically matching people up with a need for a ride somewhere. So this whole sharing thing, even though it may seem really cutting edge, has actually been around for generations. I actually grew up in rural northern Illinois, and can remember as a boy, local farmers, a lot of their children I went to school with, would share single pieces of very expensive equipment like a combine, so that they wouldn't have to purchase 4 separate combines. They can combine one. So while it's nothing new, I think being able to mainstream it and being able to really bring this to the fore has been because of the cultural shift, because of the platform that we use, and because of the savings that are involved here too. This next slide kind of illustrates the difference, and this is based on a survey that we had commissioned, I think it was about a year ago. But if you look at this, compared to older generations, millennials participate in and are more open to collaborative consumption programs like media, like car, home, or vacation sharing. More than half of them, or 53%, indicated they would likely partake in a car sharing service like Zipcar. The study also found millennials still value the mobility factor and convenience of driving, but increasingly seek and use alternatives to personally owning a car. I can attest to this personally with a 20-year-old son who basically doesn't have any interest, certainly nothing close to what his father had when it comes to owning an automobile, or when he got to the point that he could afford to purchase one. So we're definitely seeing a cultural shift here. Again, our market, we're based here in Cambridge, Boston area. We've got the great benefit of having lots of young folks coming into town to go to school here, so we can really see this happening real time right around here. But it's certainly not unique to Boston. It's not unique to America either. But we thought that this was really interesting to see the difference in ages here as well. And then to touch on something that Antonio mentioned a little bit further. Again, the benefit of me being here for 8 years, I've been able to see the cultural shift here. Certainly coming on board, I had my doubts. Being from New England originally, I knew that maybe folks in New England aren't really known for their leading edge type of thinking and sharing, but this really rang, it really resonated with a lot of folks around here too, and I think it's the economic part of it. But for us, in order to help culture this culture of sharing, we really obsess about the member and the member experience. Members that have given up cars, or members that are changing the way that they think about transportation, really depend upon us to deliver. So we focus in on those key moments of truth. When you get to the car, what happens if the car is not there? What happens if it doesn't start? What happens if you can't be back on time? We're trying to make sure that we're trying to be as many things to as many people as we can be, while still keeping the sharing part of this really kind of key. There's also a major trust factor here, which I think is nothing new to anybody in the sharing business or the sharing industry. It's not only the trust that we have for our members, but it's the trust that the members have for us too. And we need to be sure that we're doing everything we can to earn that trust each and every day. And one of the ways that we do that is open and honest communication, very candid communication with our members. Members that request specific cars at specific locations will get responded to. Whether we can do it or not, maybe something different, but we'll certainly reach out to them directly and express our satisfaction and our thanks for any ideas. We're also very community driven too, and when you can think about these cars, or little pods of cars that we have all over the place, you're literally sharing these cars with your neighbors, folks that live within 2 to 4 blocks of these cars. So these are the ones that, again, it's really kind of community-based. We're not going to put a car in a community that can't use it. One of the best examples, there's a small community just south of the city here in Boston where there's a lot of gentrification going on, a lot of new building. A lot of members are kind of do-it-yourself types. So that's where we have a couple of pickup trucks, so they can use those trucks to go back and forth to the home improvement store. We also get involved a lot in nonprofits, also at the neighborhood level too. I think at last count, Boston supported about 70 to 75 nonprofits. Now, when I say nonprofits, it's everything from a nonprofit called the Pan Mass Challenge, which raises $35 million a year to cancer research, which is, there's a team of us that actually ride a 2-day ride to raise money, all the way down to the member that may need a couple of free memberships and some driving time for a book sale or a fundraiser at school, where they raffle off prizes or take bids on stuff. So we're more than happy to get involved there locally. Again, the locations and cars are key. You need to have the cars within a few blocks so they're easy to use. And we found that this community-driven support also generates a tremendous amount of referrals. About a third of our members come to us because they hear from other members that the service works, that we're dependable, and that we're trustworthy. And it's really one of the lifebloods and really one of the key links between us and the community is these referrals. And then the other thing, too, is really the behavior of the member. Again, this is all based on self-service, which is not to say that we don't want to hear from you. We certainly do. We've got processes and policies in place that can assist you if there's a problem, anything from an accident to a flat tire. But it is largely self-service. Again, key events, we know how to react to these. If you've had an accident, we've got a special team that takes care of that. If you've had a roadside event and the battery's dead or the flat tire, we've got a special team in charge of that as well. And then the other thing, too, is we're always looking for better ways to do things. We're always looking for a way to change something. We're always looking for a way to upgrade something. And a lot of that comes from member suggestions, and the member behavior as well. But member behavior, again, is key. I think anybody would see that. Any type of sharing economy, there needs to be that trust there. And then the last slide is basically shameless self-promotion. But it certainly is nice to be recognized by some leading folks in media and in government and in education that's put us kind of on the leading edge of this thing. I think certainly one of the challenges that we faced 8 years ago when I came on board, and certainly prior to my arrival, was how do we get this mainstreamed? How do we get this to work? And I think the real key here is that we recognize very early on that this really isn't about the cars. It's really about the members. And that's how we try to function each and every day. Antonio, I think that's about all I've got now. I'm looking forward to the questions a little bit later on, and I'll hand it right back to you.
Great, thanks, Dan. I'd like to encourage all the audience members as well to, if you do have questions for either Dan or me or Greg or the audience as a whole, to post them in the Submit Your Questions section in the interface there in the upper right. Before we go over to Greg, thanks Dan for that intro. One question that's come up a few times is both tactically for Zipcar, what happens if the Zipcar is damaged while it's parked or it's in transit, if it gets scratches or dents. But as we're thinking about that, I'll have you answer that, Dan, but think about also, and Greg, to you, when we're in the sharing economy and we're looking at sharing assets or services across organizations, the responsibility is somewhat diffused, right? So part of the challenge with sharing is that we have these organizations or silos that are very accountable. If you know that a particular government agency is responsible for X, you know that we can have accountability around that. But if it's shared across a bunch of organizations, oftentimes that responsibility is diffused, and we need to figure out how to handle that. So, Dan, first to you, can you tell us again what happens if someone takes a corner a little bit too fast and dings the bumper, and what you guys do about that?
The answer is really simple. We provide liability insurance on the car up to $300,000, and we also have a collision deductible on the car anywhere from zero, basically, which you can purchase a waiver, up to $750 and a couple of different levels in between. But essentially, it's the same thing that if you were driving your own car. If it gets hit in a parking lot, it's a dent. You're going to have to fix it. We keep our cars fixed, so. But it's something that the member would obviously share responsibility for. And in the case of an accident, as I said, we've got special teams that can be engaged to take care of that. But I guess to make a long story short, it's really the same as if you own the car.
Okay. Another follow-up question before we hop over to Greg is when we're thinking about sharing in general in the sharing economy, if we get to this economies of scale where we can share assets across a large base of users, that makes a lot of economic sense. But when we get into smaller communities, smaller cities, what's the the threshold or the the number of people that Zipcar would need to make a viable operation?
We look, usually it depends on the population you're talking about, but we can go sometimes as low as about 30 to 35 members per car, on up to 65 or 70 members per car, depending on the population you're serving. And that use we monitor very closely. We don't want the cars too busy because our tagline is wheels when you want them. That's a real obligation to us. So we want to be sure that we've got enough cars out there to satisfy demand within reason. And then, again, it's similar to an airline or a car rental company. You celebrate when the plane leaves the gate and there's two people waiting that weren't able to get seats. That's not a celebration for us. We want to be sure that we can continue to deliver on the promise to the members of Wheels When You Want Them. So those are really kind of the numbers on two opposite ends of the spectrum there. So it can fall in between there. But again, if we see cars getting too busy in a particular pod or a particular area, we'll add more cars.
So you definitely have plans to expand throughout the United States and into smaller communities as long as it kind of hits those thresholds, right?
Is that a forward-looking statement?
There was no forward-looking statements today. That's right. Let's pivot over to Greg a bit. Greg Wass is the CIO of Cook County, Illinois, which is the Chicago and the area around that. Greg, as you go into your slides, there are two themes that kind of came out of a lot of questions that we've had here so far on this end. That's one around accountability, who is responsible for a product or service if it's damaged. In the case of government, if we have multiple agencies sharing a certain service, especially citizen-facing services where something happens, who's really responsible for that? A second major theme or question is about scale. And the questions around Zipcar were, at what point do they move into other cities, and how many people do they need? When we look at government, Greg, I think a good question related to that is, at what point does it make it worthwhile for agencies to share a product or service? So, Greg, the floor is yours, and take it from here.
Thanks, Antonio. Thanks, Dan. Transforming Cook County is the title of my 15 minutes or so. And scale is something that we're blessed with here. We have a $3 billion budget. We are the county that includes Chicago, so we've got 5 million people who we serve, 1.8 million parcels of land, one of the largest hospital systems in the country, one of the largest court systems, and probably the largest jail system in the country. So scale is something that helps us, and there's no economies of scale without scale. So I think that I will get to some things in here that are relevant to smaller cities and to more rural areas, but a lot of the benefits of technology are really around scale, and a lot of the benefits of what we're going to look at here in terms of government's response to the sharing economy really do need scale. But that scale may actually occur across multiple jurisdictions over the whole space of a country rather than just in a region. So we'll see about that. I'm going to talk about three things. First of all, the drivers of government transformation, specific to Cook County, but I think generalizable to government. Second, what can government learn from Zipcar? I've tried to tailor this to Dan's presentation here. And then finally, 4 specific takeaways or lessons learned from this sharing economy. So let's go to the next slide. If I can get rid of my tray here. Okay, here we go. First of all, what's driving the need for transformation? We know that there's a fiscal crisis in government. Tax revenues are down because of the fallout in the economy. That's persisted. Less states in trouble than there were 2 years ago, but there's still many states and larger cities and counties across the country in financial trouble. But this isn't just about a financial crisis. It's also, I'll show, a crisis of aging infrastructure and also a crisis of cooperation and collaboration. This is the the future for Cook County if we don't do anything about the tax side, which is the blue line, which is revenues projected over the next 4 years, and the expenditure side, the red line, which continues to climb. In a way, our revenue decreases here are our own fault, but it's something that we had to do. The predecessor to the board president who I work for increased the sales tax in Cook County in the middle of a recession by 1%. If you think about that, the county sales tax used to be 1%, and we added a percentage point to that, so really doubled the sales tax level. What our board president campaigned on, and which the Board of Commissioners is supporting, is a decrease over 4 years of 0.25% a year in that sales tax rate. So it's self-inflicted a little bit on top of the economy, but we felt very strongly that the last thing that we wanted to do in a recession was to increase sales taxes on people. I mentioned a crisis of aging infrastructure. The second thing that's driving the need for transformation in government across the board is aging infrastructure and technology, and that's not just roads and bridges, it's mainframes and mid-ranges and all the 1980s and 1990s technology that we're still living with. We'd like to get to the far right and top end of the picture here, which is the cloud computing, community cloud, private cloud. We've got several steps that we have to go through on the way to get there. The private sector, for the most part, startups don't even think about mainframes for the most part, but companies that have been in business for a while have gone through this evolution. If their business is not heavy transaction volume oriented, and ours is not, then they got out to mid-range years ago. And we're in the process of doing that, but again, it's a multi-step process to go through. And the third thing that I mentioned is a crisis of cooperation and collaboration. If you take a look at some of the things that we walked into when we came in the door in January 1st of 2011, last year, we found a lot of applications that were built on these platforms in the 1980s and 1990s. Mission-critical functions continued to live on the mainframe and mid-range computers. Our staff are not business analysts and developers. They tend to be developers on the legacy systems, on COBOL programs running on a mainframe, et cetera. We have, depending on how you count it, 5 or 6 financial systems, not one, and we need to converge to one. Our applications tend to be very siloed in nature. They support specific departments or agencies and specific business functions within those agencies. I'm not saying anything new to people who work in IT and government. This is a very familiar kind of drill. There is little to no data sharing or cross-boundary services. The projects that were run at Cook County, the big projects, tended to be vendor-centric, and by that I mean we just handed the keys, if you will, to the vendor and said, take it away and come back in 6 months or a year with the project delivered. That's not the way to run a project, and we're suffering the consequences of that. Projects that really don't, they deliver something that isn't quite what the user needs, and the user doesn't use the function. A couple of other things, no project prioritization or governance, and so we're going to show how we address that. Believe it or not, no project management methodology, no change control method, no service level agreements, and no strategy. The most remarkable thing that I found when I came in the door was that the previous administration, in the last month of the last year of their term, delivered at the cost of $2 million an IT strategic plan to the new administration coming in the door, which this chart on the left is the only real surviving result of that. So you can see that it wasn't something that was really useful to us coming in the door, except to depict kind of the sorry state that things were in. So on to the question, I think, for today, which is how can government learn from Zipcar? What can we learn from Zipcar? I think one of the things that Dan and Antonio both mentioned is that what we need is a behavior change to really accomplish our goals. And in Zipcar, the behavior change clearly is to go from that concept of owning your own car, which you picked out especially for you and which sits in the garage or in a parking space, and moving that behavior to one of shared car usage and treating the car more as a service and a really kind of a group that you belong to that uses these vehicles. And the users are a team not only The cars are part of that team, but the users must feel like they're part of the team themselves. What's the analogy and the behavior change that we've seen in IT? Many companies and several governments have moved already from an on-site data center to cloud computing of some variety. And there are pretty robust services, I just named a few here, that have made that possible in the last few years. We're certainly looking at that along with the City of Chicago and the other governments in the Chicago area as an objective over the next 5 to 10 years to move out of the data center completely and into a cloud computing or hybrid cloud environment. But there's another third kind of dimension that I think we should look at for government, which is not just outsourcing or sharing services among governments, but also moving from physical city hall to virtual civic apps, and I'll tell you what that means, but these are applications that may be on a mobile platform or on a website, but they are built by private entrepreneurs, by developers using government data. And it is a really new and very unique way of sharing the task of governing with the public who needs the services. Second, what can we learn from Zipcar? These two diagrams here correspond to the vertical dimensions of Antonio's 2x2 matrix. On the left, the organizational facing back office transformation involves shared services, interoperability, and collaboration in planning and governance. And these are a few models here. I think this diagram comes from Deloitte and some work that I did with Deloitte at the state of Illinois in a very similar kind of capacity of bringing together these back office functions into shared service centers. But on the right-hand side, the customer-facing front office transformation involves more cross-boundary processes, and as I mentioned, a partnership with the public. And as Tim O'Reilly describes it, the view of government as a platform, not as a service delivery unit in itself, but as a combined with the public service delivery partnership. And this diagram on the right-hand side is one from a company that hosts Cook County's open data website, data.cookcountyil.gov. And that is Socrates' notion of the red circle, which is our back-end processes or our back-end layer, which is all the sort of legacy systems in the county that produce data, and then this front-end cloud that can either be, on the left side, made available to the public through open data sites and to developers through an API to make it possible to use data to build apps. And on the right-hand side, a private cloud side that allows us to have one system of reference to base other systems on, and this open data portal or open data site becomes that system. So what lessons can we learn from the sharing economy, the trusty economy, and the Zipcar model? The first one in IT and in business processes is to identify candidates for shared services. On the left-hand side here, you see kind of the current, what we're faced with now, which is the silos and siloed functions, which tend to be aligned with agencies and departments. The arrows from left to right demonstrate that there are services or functions that are served by each of these separate silos, but they're served independently. What we want to move to is the right-hand side, which is more of a structured hierarchy of services, starting with the shared services at the core. And for shared services, we look to those functions that have scale economies and those functions that can be treated as commodities. So we have to stop trying to do the things that should be vanilla, like infrastructure. And when I say infrastructure in IT, I mean support for the desktop computers, support for telecommunications, support for email, for the internet service connections and all those things. So all those sort of vanilla things that are currently done by each department or agency need to be centralized. And that's a pretty simple model that we've been fairly successful at moving forward here in Cook County. Lesson number 2, think outside the organization. I've got a simplified diagram of our 4-year strategic plan from 2011 to 2014 here. And just hitting some of the big items, on the left side I mentioned city-county collaboration. In year one we started a multi-year project with the City of Chicago to start looking for services that the city and county could join up and deliver together, thereby improving service to customers as well as reducing the overall cost of providing those services. And already in that area we've merged our geographic information systems staff, so we have one GIS function moving forward. We have merged our workforce investment boards, so we have a single workforce investment board for the entire county and not separate ones for the north part, the City of Chicago, and the south part. Those three are now combined into one. We have started working on joint certification for minority business enterprises and women business enterprises that want to do business with government. It makes a lot of sense rather than having separate certification arms of each agency and each government. Public health is an area that we're looking at trying to join up and have a single public health function. Boards of election is a really interesting one. There's a City of Chicago Board of Election and there's a Cook County Board of Election for all those precincts and jurisdictions outside of the City of Chicago. So on election day, the media, anybody that's interested, needs to marry up the data from both of those to get any sense of what's happening overall in a county-wide election or a statewide election. That's something that we'd like to see change and at least have common platforms and provide that information in a common way. And finally, in technology, we have joined up with the City of Chicago to do joint procurements. Our volume is about a third of their volume, but together we have the kind of volume that can lead to scale economies and software purchases to hardware purchases, et cetera. Going forward this year, we're consolidating IT staff among different elected officials into the Bureau of Technology. We're doing fiber sharing agreements. I wanted to mention this one. The Chicago Transit Authority, the local public transit company here, laid fiber in its right-of-way along the subways and the elevated trains 10 or 15 years ago. They use maybe a tenth of the capacity they've got, and they are willing to make it available to other governments for public purposes. So we have already signed one intergovernmental agreement with the Chicago Transit Authority to get us out to Stroger Hospital on the Chicago's west side. And to Antonio's point about how does this work, what's the accountability, how do we handle the maintenance, we have a shared maintenance agreement as part of that intergovernmental agreement so that any time that there's a break in the fiber, that's a joint responsibility of all the parties that are going to be using that fiber. Jumping down to the lower part of that section in the second column, a regional portal. We made the news recently, the City of Chicago, Cook County, and the State of Illinois, by having a joint open data portal on the web at metrochicagodata.org. And the idea there is that we put all of our open data on one site, made it available through a single API so that developers can mash up data among the different levels of government. We believe it's certainly the largest regional open data site, and we hope to evolve that into even more transparency and open data going forward. Going to the next column, we're hoping over the next 2 years to take that sharing and that intergovernmental agreement philosophy and actually create a metropolitan technology consortium, which will be the joint fiber-owning entity, the joint data center entity, or at least migrating data centers to the cloud, and to start to provide some of these services like networks and telecom and all those kind of things from a central utility, as it were, for government. And it's an internal service. We all pay for these things separately. Again, we're looking for scale economies, and it takes a high level of agreement and cooperation to pull this off. And finally, on the right side, I think that all these things make it possible for us to do the big things that we need to do in the county, like joined up criminal justice systems, joined up property information systems, and a single financial system for the county. I've got a couple minutes left. I'm going to go through 2 more lessons, and then we'll go to the Q&A. What we're also learning from Zipcar and the sharing economy is that we need to find ways to leverage a change in behavior. And to one of the questions that I saw earlier about turf and dealing with that perception that we're encroaching on other people's turf, and that's certainly a way to run your project into the ground if you do that in government. We're using the sort of fiscal challenge as the rationale for this. We are asking all of those groups, the group that works on criminal justice systems, the group that works on property information systems, that works on health information systems and back office or business systems, to come up with joined up technology ideas that they then send to an investment board, which is consisting of the CFO, myself, and a representative from the Office of the President, to evaluate the business case and to look at ROI. We're looking at a hurdle rate of about 20% internal rate of return and a 5-year payback, and really apply that kind of business case thinking to all of these IT projects, and really trying to force collaboration in a sense by being the ones that hold the funding and requiring that collaboration before we'll fund projects. And finally, a really interesting dynamic here that Dan alluded to a little bit here, but which I've had some experience with in the car sharing program, which is when you drive a car, you want to leave it in the same way that you expect to get it. And that kind of cooperation and feeling like you're part of a team is what government needs to do more with its citizens, its constituents, and the entrepreneurs and developers that can actually make something happen with our data. So what we're doing around this and letting the customer do some of the work here is we've launched these open data sites. I mentioned data.cookcountyil.gov and metrochicagodata.org, and we're putting as much data out on the web as we can, and it's up to us to ensure the accuracy and the timeliness, to respect privacy and security, not to put any social security number information or patient information out there, but to provide some basic tools like visualization and download capability, to provide some ratings and registration for people to actually tell us what they think and to rate our data sets. And then we meet with developers. We have meetups, we have hackathons, we have apps contests, and we do all this to try to encourage the use of county and city and state data, to tell people what it is we're putting out there, and to start to see if we can evolve this sort of share economy where we actually work with developers and entrepreneurs to deliver service to people, so that they know, because they need it, that people need a bus app or a snowplow app, or the kinds of things that we're seeing from the city or the state or the county. Dan talked about the trust factor. Trust is important in this. We're putting a lot of data out there. We count on the people who use that data, who look at that data, to be our partners in this. If they see anything wrong with it, we expect them to come to us first. And so in a way, we're kind of exposing government to some risk by doing this. But on the other hand, we think that we need to be a little less risk averse than we've been in the past, and to start to develop these trust relationships, and to move forward with this notion of sharing with the public the way to get things done better. And with that, I thank you, and there's my information, and I look forward to the Q&A. So thanks, Antonio.
Thank you, Greg, for that overview of what's going on in Cook County. We have a lot of good questions that are teed up here from the audience. I want to start with one particular one that will go to you, Greg, and also to you, Dan. Just kind of going back into, as you talked about how you move these initiatives forward, generally speaking, from the individual side, what we call the behavioral economics of something like Zipcar, individuals are very incentivized to buy by the hour, because it obviously benefits them financially. But in government, when we're looking at sharing services and buying pieces of a service rather than a whole, there's generally not an incentive to do that beyond maybe what citizens are saying. They all want effective and efficient government, but behind the scenes, mayors and program managers and agency heads have incentive to hold on to assets and to their silos and to resources. So how are you doing in Cook County with kind of breaking down some of those barriers? What are the carrots you might use to move people, and what are the quote-unquote sticks that you're using to push them if they don't want to move forward?
So for Cook County, what I found is that the level of service that we provide out of the Bureau of Technology, because I'm responsible for IT services, so that's the main thing I think about here, is the quality of that service is somewhere between the best quality siloed services and the worst quality siloed services. And I remember having this conversation when I was at the state of Illinois. I was the CIO there for 3 years. I had a conversation with the revenue director there, who's a friend of mine. He said, Greg, I don't want to get into shared services and have the quality of service diminish for me. Like, he really prided himself on having the best finance people and HR people of any state agency, and he feared that by pooling with other agencies that that quality would diminish, that he'd lose ground. And so on that particular note, I've just made the point that what shared services is really about is taking as much of the talent as possible that's distributed around these different agencies and bringing that talent to bear on the problems that we've got collectively. And I think that if you can do that, then you can make everybody better off, and that you don't have to have this kind of convergence or lowest common denominator, but you can get the benefits of that talent. So that's just one angle, but that's something that we found that works.
So you're saying really for the carrot side, for incentivizing the mayors, the program managers, agency heads, it's really a matter of course, recognizing the cost savings, but also, most importantly, moving them forward via the quality of service that they could get relative to the price. How about, though, as far as more of the stick side? You know, you might have an agency that doesn't really want to share, that's holding back in their fiefdom and their silo. Are you using the investment board to provide the stick for that, or how do you manage that?
So we use the investment board for the application side projects. If you remember the kind of concentric circles or rings, those projects are really right now in the outer circle. They're the sort of federated point solutions, and we're trying to draw those together. The project that I'm working on right now for shared services, though, is really the infrastructure and the basic vanilla things. So we spend a lot of time with the agencies just trying to define what is it that can be shared and what is it that's unique. And we're trying to move that line from being completely over on the, everything is unique side to somewhere in the middle where we can say, okay, let's get some concurrence on the things that we can share. But in the end, I think that for some agencies, it's going to take a demonstration that this works before they join in. So if we do it on a voluntary basis, we've got to have some early wins, and we certainly have some agencies that need the help, that would be moving up if they came into a shared services environment. We're going to do those first and see how that fares, and then we'll be able to show some benefits and results to those other agencies.
Okay. Over to you, Dan and Zipcar. Just maybe you can tell us from your viewpoint, as we're struggling here in government to adopt some of these sharing practices, when most of the incentives for your consumers are aligned very well. They want to save money and they want nice cars and that are new, whatnot. But you must have run into occasionally in some cities some resistance from vested interest groups, whether or not be auto manufacturers or people that have parking facilities that they want to have as many people having cars as possible, or even maybe just people that love to have their own car, right? That don't want to seem to embrace the model. Any stories or ideas or anecdotes that come from Zipcar to help us think about how to move people forward behaviorally?
That's actually a great question, and on a community level, one of the things I said a little bit earlier about our members in referring folks back and forth, we've got the great benefit of having some community-based, we call them evangelists, but these are the people that know that this whole car sharing thing works, love the benefits that the local community has on this, both environmentally and certainly economically. But I think at the end of the day, when it comes to translating this type of thinking in the sharing economy to government, for us and for me personally on the local and state level in and around Massachusetts, it's really about leadership. There's a couple of things going on here. If you look at Greg's slide on revenues and costs, they're going in opposite directions. So there's an economic reality that the folks that want to hold on to their silo need to face, and that is you need to figure out a way to do more with less. Now, the easiest way to do more with less is to share, but if there's a way that you can come up with cutting costs and being able to deliver the same types of services to whoever your constituents are for less money, that's going to be your mission. Number two, again, to go back to the slide that I had about millennials, I believe there's a new way of thinking coming here. These folks vote. These folks run for office. So there's going to be a change in, I think, what expectations are out there. But again, at the end of the day, it's how do we provide the leadership to local governments to get people to think a little bit differently. Again, it's really kind of a top-down thing. We've had the great benefit of working with some very influential mayors in various cities around the United States, and quite frankly, others that aren't so innovative. But it's interesting to see how some of them have overcome this. Again, you mentioned people not wanting to give up that parking space out in front of their house to the local car sharing constituents. That one parking space is going to satisfy 30 to 70 people, whereas the one parking space for you and your SUV that you use once every 2 weeks is just for one person. And I think local government, certainly local people, and a new generation of Americans coming on board is going to see this as a clear benefit too. But as I said, at the end of the day, as a leader, particularly as a government leader, if you can present to your constituents cost savings transferred into tax savings with goods and services that not only are not diminished but they're increased, I don't know that there's anything that can stop you. Greg, would you agree with that?
I would concur, but you really have to make the case, and it's been an interesting year and a half for me here. When we make that case to the media, we actually get good news stories out of it, which is a rarity for government, but they actually print that stuff.
Okay, great. So it sounds like one of the threads from all this as we're working on these issues is how do we move the people, whether it's organizations or the individual users of these services, to incentivize them to do this. Partly it'll be just waiting it out. I think over time, as Dan said, the next generation coming up this will be just the way they operate. Partly it's by carrots, as Greg said, and really providing great services that they really can't say no to. And to some degree, I think we'll have to have a few sticks along the way, making sure that when government agencies are pushing for new things, that they look to a shared first type strategy. The OMB in the U.S. federal government has coined this shared first quote unquote term. The Obama administration has said to federal agencies, if you're planning to do something new in the IT space, you need to make sure first that every other federal agency could partner on it to make sure it's shared first instead of doing it on your own. So a lot of carrots and sticks moving forward. Another question I want to get to here, we'll start with you, Greg, is coming out is, does a sharing economy equal fewer jobs? And I think this is really important because in government, one of the things we always have an eye on is how do we become more efficient. We want to make sure that taxpayers get the best return on their investment, so to say. But government is also a main supplier of jobs for many jurisdictions in rural America, especially where oftentimes 70-80% of people in government, or 70-80% of the population are in government-type jobs. So when we're looking at sharing and taking out some of the duplication and things, that might equal fewer jobs. What are you doing in Cook County to address that issue?
So just as a microcosm, our own Bureau of Technology in the past year was plus 17 new application development and management jobs and minus 17 data center support jobs. So neutral, but a shift in jobs from those functions that we see as candidates for sharing, and a move towards jobs for those functions that we need to spend more time with customers and to develop solutions for them for their business needs. So, and also going to that last point I made, if we're going to share with our customers the business of actually delivering services, then there are potentially jobs for developers, for entrepreneurs who create those kind of apps and sites that customers can use, and they can sell advertising, they can sell the app. That's just at its infancy, and we're hoping that we're going to see that take off in the next few years. But we may end up with a net gain, but it may mean that government has to shrink and that the private sector has to pick up some of that, not through the traditional kind of contractor or consulting jobs, but through a shift in the way that government actually interacts and provides services.
So, Greg, one of the things we've often said at the Shared Services Summit that we run here at Harvard, where we bring in leaders to deal with these issues, is if we can save money on the back office, quote unquote, through sharing services, we can move more resources up to the front office, quote unquote, services, meaning the services that directly touch constituents day to day. Does that seem to really be true at the ground level, that if you save money in the back office in Cook County, you can put it forward towards the social services in the front end?
I think it's true, although you saw, and Dan pointed out, that chart, that first chart I showed with the lines that deviate, we do need some bottom line savings, there's no doubt about it. But if we can generate more than the savings that we commit to, and we have a very structured, rational process at Cook County now around making budget commitments and sticking to them and being measured on a biweekly basis about how close we're sticking to the plan. But for example, if we, and we did manage to save more than we committed to in the area of joint technology contracts with the City of Chicago, and as a result, we're able to use some of that money to move some of the projects that are going to help our customers up in the queue. So projects that would normally be delayed for lack of funding, we're able to move up because we've freed up some of these resources. So it's very important to know what the expectations are, what the objectives are, and if we meet those or exceed those, then we can start to use some of that savings for helping customers.
Thanks, Greg. So, Dan, you might not have much relative to that because it's quite different in the government sector, but as you kind of look at this, does a sharing economy, how do we use it for economic development, for example? So it's not about losing jobs, but it's about growing the economy or growing new ways of doing things.
Another great question. Think about it from our perspective here. If we're saving people and households a significant amount of money on transportation each month, that enables them to spend that money elsewhere. In a lot of cases, and we've heard directly from members on this, it's the difference between owning a home and renting a home. It's the difference between a two-bedroom apartment and a one-bedroom apartment. And we believe that this money being freed up is being spent locally. And at the end of the day, it's really money changing hands that is really kind of the grease that runs the economic engine of any community or any state or local government or any economy. So it's similar to what Greg said. It's probably more of a shift than it is an elimination. But at the end of the day, if it's all about trying to do more with less, I think it frees up more resources for folks to spend on other things.
Okay, thanks. Let's pivot a bit to, we have a few questions around service agreements and customer relationship management. So, Dan, I know you talked about some of this. You have, really robust service for your Zipsters. Do you have guidance to government as to how they can best structure those types of relationships? So, for example, if Greg or the other people on the line here are trying to share services across organizations, how they can structure that so that people are happy with the services?
Actually, I touched on it and Greg did as well, and it's about getting the folks who are taking delivery on these services, who are going to use these services as part of the engine and part of the ideas, part of the innovation that's going to make these ideas successful. So it's open, honest communication. It's promoting ideas and promoting the free exchange of ideas to make the service better, to basically tell us that are providing the shared services what it is you need, what can we do that can be better. And at the end of the day, there is a little bit of a carrot, there is a little bit of a stick here to try to monitor some of the, let's call it out of bounds behavior. And that, there's varying ways of dealing with that. But at the end of the day, I think it's really all about getting and building a community around whatever resources are being shared.
So, and Dan, I know, I'm a Zipster, so when I'm here in Boston, Cambridge area, I use Zipcar, and there are quite a few rules of the road, so to say, for our Zipsters. We need to make sure that we keep the car clean when we, put it back, that the tank is less than a quarter full, that we fill it, for example. How is that working for Zipcar as far as getting people to follow those rules of the road, and what can we learn here in government about how maybe to structure some of that?
Antonio, I'm a little disappointed you only mentioned 2 of the 6 simple rules that we have. It's really, as far as getting people to kind of understand things, we just bring it to a common sense level. The best example I can give is Uncle Charlie, we call it. The Uncle Charlie concept is simple. Uncle Charlie has a car that he keeps in his driveway that all of his nieces and nephews are welcome to use anytime they want to. But you have to respect Uncle Charlie and the other nieces and nephews by being sure that you bring the car back in the same shape that it was and bring it back on time. And again, these are basic kind of community-based behaviors that we just kind of build upon. I mean, if you lived in a congested neighborhood in Cambridge, you wouldn't show up at 1 o'clock in the morning blasting the horn to wake up your spouse to let you in the door. It's basically bad behavior for the community. And for us, it's really kind of monitoring the use. Again, if you're somebody who just simply can't be back on time, it's not that we don't want you, we do, but the service isn't going to be built for you. You're probably better off getting your own car so you can just really come and go as you please. If you can't pick up after yourself, you probably shouldn't be on public transportation either. But again, at the end of the day, it's really just common courtesy and common sense that we let kind of lead the way.
Okay, great. And I'll make sure I review the rules next time I get in the car there for you, Dan. Greg, do you have, or kind of from the tactical side, do you have explicit service level agreements with, from the CIO's office to the different organizations that are sharing the services? And how do you manage that customer relationship? Do you actually have someone that works with the individual agencies to make sure they're happy with things?
So this is in the process of being put in place in Cook County. Again, we're a year and a half down the road. A lot of the contracts that we had that actually were used to obtain services like network managed services and those kind of things for IT were not done on a service level agreement basis. So many of the contracts that we are now replacing with new competitive procurements and joint competitive procurements with the city were simply staff augmentation contracts. And in a staff augmentation contract, there's no, the vendor doesn't commit to any kind of level of service, so it's very difficult for the county to do that or for the government to do that if you don't have that kind of customer relationship, service level agreement style, management style in place. So we're in the process of rebidding those contracts. We're putting SLAs into those contracts, and we'll be in turn offering those SLAs to our customers. And I think this points up an interesting kind of thing that I ran into at the state as well. SLAs are a big part of IT provisioning in the private sector, and they're an increasing part of doing that in the public sector. In shared services, the user agencies will really demand some kind of service level requirements or objectives or agreements, but they often are coming from a place where they never had those to begin with. So trying to benchmark the level of service that is being delivered right now versus the level that you get out of shared services is really critical to making this kind of a project work. So we're kind of in the middle of that. What I'm finding is that the pace of change for me is never fast enough, but I've got to learn how to distinguish between that sort of slowness that's a result of sort of a natural risk aversion that we can try to help people get over, and the slowness that is a result of just the limitations of existing capacity that we're really trying to change. So we don't want to have a shared service program that climbs up your value curve and then comes back a few notches. We want to keep moving forward with shared services, but in doing so, we really have to be able to distinguish between what is just sort of a risk-averse behavior that we can help change, and what are the constraints of the capacity of the organization that we need to change.
Okay, thanks. One question, if I can bundle a few questions that are coming in, that Greg, maybe we can start with you to look at first, is what types of the platforms should we build in government to create this new, to leverage this sharing economy, things that then citizens can take and co-create with government new services. There's some of the chat room here is talking quite a bit about can citizens do things with this to create new things in government and to share things that maybe government can't build themselves. So what are you building in Cook County for as far as the platform for sharing with the open government and advice that you may have there?
So I noticed that the link for metrochicagodata.org was posted, and I really suggest you take a look at that and see what we've done with that. That is a private provider. We wanted to ramp this up quickly. We didn't really want to spend the time in developing something specific to this, so we looked for a cloud solution provider, and so the company there is Socrata. But we're already looking to the next generation of how the city of Chicago, the Cook County, and the state of Illinois can start to move to even more data in a bigger cloud environment, maybe managed internally, maybe externally, but where do we go from here? And I think that's a big experiment. It's just taking off. I believe it shows a lot of promise. There's a lot of interest in it right now, but we don't yet have that kind of critical mass of developers who are interested in it. We just did a fascinating thing 2 weekends ago. There was a 24-hour hackathon put on by a group called Global Data Science, and it was hosted in London. It was run by a contest firm that's based currently in Australia, and it was won by a guy out of San Francisco. And the data that was used for the challenge for this contest to build the best predictive model was Cook County's data on pollution or on air quality. So we gave the developers 8 days worth of data, and then we asked them to predict the next 3 days based on all that data. This is big data. It's tens of thousands of lines of data. And I think that is the big experiment that we're undertaking right now is there enough interest, maybe through these challenges or maybe through foundation grants and that sort of thing, to start collaborating with developers and with entrepreneurs to build the things that people need out of government, that government is finding it expensive or difficult to build itself. So I think that we have great expectations and hopes for that. We're not spending a lot of money on it, but I think that it's a possible path to the future.
So, Greg, one of the things that Washington, D.C., for I think it was a couple of years back, and if anyone out here on the call knows the exact number, but they did a pretty big OpenGov push, and they more or less opened up data sets to citizens to say, create an application to, here's all of our data, create an application that will tell your fellow citizens something new. And I don't recall the exact number, but I want to say it was more than or close to 100 or more, slightly more than 100 different applications that were built by citizens. Everything from, doing crime reporting type applications to, where is the pothole and how long has it been since it's been fixed, to school information and data that came from that, to housing prices, et cetera. So I think there is a lot of opportunity there to, as the sharing economy takes hold and citizens can get a hold of that data to open up some new things. Are there any first kind of rounds of what you're seeing in Cook County for citizens actually creating new services from this?
We've seen some simple things like this. The city of Chicago made available during this. We had very few snowstorms this winter. It was unlike Chicago, but I think that was true across the country. The weather was very strange, but we put data out from the city of Chicago on the location of all of the snowplows at any moment in time. So you could see where the snowplow was, and you could also have the history of the data about where the snowplow had been that day. So some local developers who now formed a not-for-profit group called Open City, it's Open City Apps, I believe, developed a mobile device app that could tell you when your street had been plowed, because it took all of the data that the city was providing out of the current location, and they built an app around actually showing the streets that had been plowed using that data. So that was a useful kind of very simple extension of what the city was already putting out for open data. On a much larger kind of direction, and these kind of things should be reusable across cities. We talked earlier about scale and how important scale is to make these things happen, but once an app is built, the developer can make it available either through open source or by licensing it to other cities. It doesn't have to be specific to a city. So there's a group that started up a couple of years ago called Code for America. It's like a Teach for America for developers. And their mission specifically is to help cities with their technology issues and to bring an army, literally 30 to 40, small army of developers in who either want to give back or want to build some knowledge in this direction, and for very little money or free. I'm not sure if they're compensated for this. They spend 6 months working with cities across the country on developing apps or developing technology in that kind of a that 24-hour hackathon kind of culture, right? So let's develop something quickly. Let's launch it. Let's see if it works, and let's continually improve it. What they're working on this year is something called Open 311, which takes the 311 standard, the Open 311 standard, and then builds that out so that very soon, I think, as this evolves, we're going to see cities actually publishing their 311 data online so that you've got a better web service for 311, which is typically a information and referral or some kind of a service hotline for cities across the country. It's pretty common in larger cities, and turns it into a kind of a way to make data-driven decisions so that the data that comes out of 311 can be used to predict where the next need for service is. So take all that data and to start to direct city services to the places that 311 in real time is telling them they need to focus. I think that's going to be a very useful way to take all this big data that we're producing every minute and to actually use it to determine where we need to direct our services.
So in essence, there's kind of what we call an ecosystem that's developing from the sharing economy where private developers, citizens, and government are slowly starting to create new services from this data. And thank you to Megan in the general chat room who put in the link to the Washington, D.C.'s Apps for Democracy initiative. I guess there's about 47 different apps that were created in 30 days from this. So that's great. I do wonder how many of these apps are still being used, I wonder. So if anyone out there has information on that, or if Greg, have you seen once these apps are developed, or do they seem to kind of sit on the cyber shelf, so to say, or are people actually using them and building on them?
The cyber shelf, that's a new one. I think it's a mix. I think that some of the apps have a surprising life. Some, like ChicagoLobbyist.org, we're not surprised that that's gotten so much attention. That was built by a group of local developers in a very short period of time, and it takes the lobbyist data for the city of Chicago, who they met with, what they were meeting about, how much they actually earned as reported to the city, and puts it in a really manageable website for people to actually sort, view, and dive into the data and learn about who's making the most, talking to who about what. So fascinating stuff. I'll also mention the Code for America site. Code for America is the one behind the Open 311 extension, and that's codeforamerica.org.
And Greg, who the Open 311 initiative? Who's the point person on that? Who's heading it up?
That's really if you go to codeforamerica.org, you can learn about what they're doing with cities and the Open 311 initiative. Okay.
So Dan, over to you in Zipcar, just a kind of a random question related to this, but are you seeing anything, as I know, for example, the Zipcar definitely produced your own app that you can download to iPhones and other mobile devices, but has there been any type of ecosystem that's developed by this among Zipsters where they have developed ideas or different types of products or innovations on this based on your platform?
Well, I think there's a couple of interesting things. Actually, one of the peer-to-peer car sharing companies that was recently started up out on the West Coast is actually started up by a former Zipcar member who was actually attending Harvard when he came up with the idea to go peer-to-peer. I know that we've also had a couple of different folks contact us concerning parking space applications too. So when a Zipster needs to go to the other side of town, he can use some of these apps to find a place to park the car too. So, and we're always looking for little innovative ways to help out folks, but I wouldn't say that there's been an overwhelming amount of them, but I think the longer we're out there and the more frequently people use the service, the higher the likelihood that we'll see innovative ideas come from that.
Okay. Great. So we're getting close to our allotted time here, so I'll give you, Dan, and Greg one more question. So starting with you, Greg, you're in the elevator with the governor of Illinois, and he says, "Tell me why in 30 seconds we need to move forward with the sharing economy and what it means for government." What are you going to tell him?
You know, I did this to my own staff, and they were all stymied. So thanks a lot. Okay, starting right now. So what we're attempting to do is to expose a lot of the data that we can make public in government, data on public health, data about transportation, data about human service provision, and public safety, criminal justice, and put it on the web in a fashion that developers and entrepreneurs can actually create views into the data that the public is going to benefit from. So to cooperate with the developer community in building applications that allow people to get better service.
Great. Dan, you're in the elevator with the governor of Massachusetts and some other leaders in government, and they say, you know, we're not quite sure about the sharing economy, what it can do to make government better. You have about 30 seconds to tell them what you think. What are you going to tell them?
I've actually been in the elevator with the governor of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and I couldn't get a word in edgewise. But I think it's really about delivering a higher quality service with less resources. We can create communities around these shared things. You know, Greg touched on it a little bit. I mean, if you think about law enforcement all sharing the same type of resources, there's a tremendous amount of benefits that comes from that. It also makes us a little bit smarter about delivering the services. Again, for us, it's about member use patterns and what cars are needed when and when are the peaks in utilization. And for Greg, it was about those 311 calls for city services and trying to anticipate where the next use is going to be, where the next need is. And again, I think it puts the governor and puts the governor's ideas on the leading edge of what is an upcoming change and an upcoming behavior in not only society but certainly in government. So you'd want to be ahead of the curve so you can stay elected.
Staying elected is a good thing for most of them. Okay, well, thank you, Dan, Curtin. Thank you, Greg Wass, for your time, and thanks to everyone else that participated today for taking time and energy. The recording and the materials for today's webinar will be available on the Government Innovators Network site. The link is where you registered. It's also posted there in the chat for you as well. And that will be up very, very soon. In addition, please watch for communication from the Harvard Ash Center on future webinars, executive education, and thought leadership. And until then, do good, make good, and take care. Bye-bye from Cambridge. Thanks, everyone.
Bye now.